Hey guys, welcome to the Contend podcast. Michael Allen here, my co-host Dennis, and we have with us today David Blaylock join us in studio. So thank you guys for joining us today, and I'm going to hop right into it. I think today we're going to be sharing about the CJF, which is the Collegiate Jesus Fast. It's 40 days of prayer and fasting for college campuses specifically, leading up to the last Thursday in February. So it's 40 days that we're already in the midst of right now. So we actually wanted to share a little bit about that, a little bit about the history, how it started, how even the Collegiate Day of Prayer started. And so actually I'll have Dennis, maybe if you can share just a little bit specifically about the Collegiate Day of Prayer. I understand It's one of the oldest ongoing days of prayer in American history, if I'm correct.
Yeah, so it goes back to the early 19th century. And, back in that time, the universities were very Christian, right? There was many of the universities were birthed out of a desire to train up, leaders in the church and things like that. And so there's a real heart for the universities. And what you start to see is churches started to have specific days where they were praying for the campuses, for the colleges, the universities, and the seminaries specifically. And that kind of coalesced, I think it was around in the 1820s, right? In the 1820s, there was an agreed upon day. They agreed on the last Thursday in February that's going to be the day where we're all going to pray. And they started doing these concerted days of prayer for the universities specifically. And that became like a big thing. And in fact, when they started doing that, they started to see like moves of God on the campuses pretty quickly. I was actually pretty surprised as I was, looking into this. This is Henry Fish talking about in his Handbook of Revivals, right? So they started this in 1823. In 1824 and 25, revivals were experienced in 5 different colleges. Wow. In 1826 on 6 colleges. In 1831 in 19, right? So you just started to see these moves of God, these outpourings of the Spirit really start fairly consistently after that for the next couple decades.
Yeah, I remember when I first heard about the Collegiate Day of Prayer and how it was said back then students would actually go to school, to college, and their parents would send them like hoping that they get saved. Right. And that's the exact opposite case now. So many students, they go in, maybe they consider themselves Christians, they're churched, they end up leaving college, not churched, potentially not even considering themselves Christians anymore. And so I think this day of prayer, as well as even what we're doing right now, the Collegiate Jesus Fast, those 40 days leading up to it, is so critical to see revival start to happen again on college campuses and universities for people to get saved. And I actually wanted to hear David share a little bit about your experience at Lee University doing the Collegiate Jesus Fast back in 2016. And that's just quick background on that. So the director of Contend, David Kem, he's been on this podcast before. It was during that year. He actually had a dream, and he was sharing that with us. And he said he had a dream, and just the quick paraphrase of it, he heard that the Lord said, we can't just ride on the coattails of our fathers anymore. Specifically in regard to fasting, we need to do our own fast, our own 40-day fast. For him specifically, his spiritual father, Lou Engle, founder of our ministry, he felt like just as Lou had done his 40-day fast, we need our own 40-day fast and not just kind of ride on the coattails, so to speak, of those that have gone before us. And so he talked with Thailand from Luke 18, like, hey, what do you think? I want to see, college students start to do 40 days of prayer and fasting. He said, well, what if we did 40 days leading up to the Collegiate Jesus Fast, the Collegiate Day of Prayer last Thursday in February. And so that's kind of how this all started. And I think it was, he said 230 different college campuses that first year ended up taking up the fast, thousands of students across the United States. And I know Lee University had their own contingency of students that ended up praying during that time. So David, if you can just kind of share your story, you were a student during that time and your experience with that.
Yeah, for sure. That fast in 2016 was super near and dear to my heart, a season that forever marked me personally as a student during that time, and lots of other students that I know as well, and God moving powerfully on our campus. So kind of how it unfolded with our campus, me as a student leader, I was leading a house of prayer on Lee's campus. I think I've mentioned it on this podcast before. And I've been going for about 8 years at that point of 24/5 in some seasons, sometimes a little bit more, sometimes a little bit less, between 100 and 120 hours of prayer a week. So pretty amazing movement really a core group of 30 to 50 young people who are really faithful, doing weekly prayer hours and coming and joining into that prayer effort on the campus. And so, our community had done lots of fasts kind of in isolation within our community, fasting for the campus. Our mandate was to pray for revival at Lee University. And then I was in relationship with David Kim. Obviously, I knew Lou Engle, and we felt this just clear, convictional call from David for, the Southeast region to really take up this call to fasting leading up to the Collegiate Day of Prayer and to host a Collegiate Day of Prayer meeting on the campus. And so, I was envisioning, more our group doing it, but the Lord so had it that we ended up getting to share with a group of campus leaders that were leaders of different clubs across the campus. We were able to share about the fast, and somehow it kind of caught on our campus in a way that, I don't think a fast or, a call to prayer had before. And, I don't know exactly how many people joined in and for how long they joined into this 40-day fast. But, the thing it was marked by was get off media, all forms of media for 40 days, and let's see what God can do. And do a Daniel fast, like just eat, no meats, no sweets. And some people did much more intense fasts. Some scaled back a little bit. But people that we didn't even have personal relationship with started fasting, at least media fast. And then something pretty profound began to happen. And so I'd heard stories of revivals at Lee in the past, and they said one of the marks of the revivals was that people just wouldn't leave the chapel. Okay. And so they would, basically the presence of God would just come in such a way that people for hours and hours and hours would just linger in the presence of God, their faces in their Bibles, just seeking Him, dwelling with Him, right? There was this hunger, overwhelming hunger that kind of overtook the campus. And so among other, pretty amazing signs and wonders and power of God being poured out. And so on this fast, what we began to see as we were just pressing in prayer, we started holding these prayer meetings on Tuesday nights and Thursday nights that we just called revival prayer. So we had our normal structured hour prayer times and our prayer sets, but then we had this very unstructured 2+ hour prayer meeting that we said, we're just going to get together and we're going to pray in the Spirit, and we're going to ask God to target our intercession towards the campus, and we're going to pray for revival and the outpouring of the Spirit. And God really began to meet us in those prayer meetings. And it was like this spirit of prayer just really began to touch our prayer community and even flow out beyond that. So we started hearing of these prayer meetings that were happening in the dorm, all night prayer meetings. And one of them was in the girls' dorm, and all of these girls getting delivered from eating addictions and self-harm and all of these different things. And so, these different pockets of things and movement were happening. And I remember, it's super difficult to get college students to pray, right? I mean, obviously, like there's so many distractions, and like being the leader of a prayer room, like I know how difficult it is to get people to pray, but kind of that spirit that we'd heard of that touched Lee's campus before, of where people were just caught up, lingering in the presence of God, focused, hungry, just spending hours with Him. That sort of spirit kind of began to overtake different pockets of the campus, unrelated to the prayer movement. And so what we saw was that these people who we didn't even know started showing up to the prayer room. And so you would go, and it was like people who I never saw in the prayer room before this time, and I never saw them in the prayer room after this season. They were just there, like reading their Bibles and praying and pressing into God for their clubs, for their, maybe people in their major, kind of their sphere of influence on the campus. So it was just this crazy experience where it felt as if a spirit of prayer began to touch different pockets all across our campus, charismatic and non-charismatic in their own way. It was like this sense of, we have to read our Bibles, we have to be in the place of prayer, and we have to pray for people to be saved. Okay, that was this general feeling, this palpable sense. And so I kind of described that as like the spirit of prayer began visiting the campus. And so it is a Christian campus, and so during our season of convocation, this was one of the big markers that we knew God was doing something significant during this fast, is that, the dean of the theology department, he gave He was speaking during one of our convocation nights, which is basically a 3-night in a row service, right? That's a mandatory. All the students have to be there. And so he gives his, not an unusual message. And basically, I think he might have been the first or second speaker of convocation. And just there was this huge response at the altar from the students. And I remember just 400 or 500 kids just packed around the altar. And the band is done, right? They're like, okay, we're done. Like, there's no more music left. And the students just won't leave that place. And they're lingering in the presence of God, weeping, repenting of sin, like many turning back to God. And I remember my professor, Dr. Cross, he said, for weeks, I was getting testimonies of students on our campus who were emailing me and said, hey, I've heard you speak before. I've been in church all my life, but something was different that night. And I encountered God in a particular way that I chose to give my entire life to Him. And those just dozens of testimonies like this that began coming in. Awesome. And so there was this, speaking to Dr. Cross, he said, I don't know what it is, this is a very brilliant guy. He said, the only thing that I know that's different is the prayer and the fasting that's going on right now. Wow. And so just really encouraging for us in that season to just continue to press in. And so as we continued to press in, we felt as if there was just a shift in the atmosphere over the campus. Something that old revivalists describe is that revival is God's arrival. And that's the sense and kind of the spirit that was felt on the campus at that time, was that God was near, that there was a God consciousness, so to speak, that began to settle in, and people and groups who were busy and doing different things. I saw these people who weren't normally going to the prayer room every day and thinking about God every day. It was like they became conscious of God and aware of Him in a different way than they had been before during this season of fasting. And so just one quick story that I think kind of highlights that idea. There was a girl, and she'd come from a non-charismatic background, and she was walking to class one day. And all of a sudden, I'm in a meeting with my Bible professor, an Old Testament professor, and all of a sudden, this girl runs up into the classroom. She kind of bursts into this meeting I'm having with my Old Testament professor, and there's just tears running down her face. And she's just like shaking. And I'm like, did somebody die? Like, what's going on? And she says, I don't know what just happened to me. I was just walking to class, and all of a sudden, I felt something inside of me begin to bubble up, and this language started coming out of me. And I started praying and speaking in this other language. Wow. And nobody was praying for her. Nobody was giving her an altar call or whatever, laying hands on her or anything. And the Holy Spirit sovereignly, just on her way, walking to class, just crashes in on her life and marks her forever with this encounter and this baptism, right? Mm-hmm. And so that kind of was a characteristic of testimonies that we were hearing on a weekly basis during this season. And it was as if, our estimates probably, by the time we get to the Collegiate Day of Prayer, we didn't know who was going to show up. And probably between 250 and 350 students flowed through that day on the Collegiate Day of Prayer. Not because we were the best marketing team on campus. It just happened. And come to find out, there was probably 150 to 200 students who joined in on this fast in some way. And it was like this corporate numbers of fasting students. It was as if God was waiting to release His presence and power and hunger onto the campus. And that's really what we encountered during that time, was this profound move of God. I call it maybe like a mini spiritual awakening, where God just came close for this season, that people were saved, the power of God was demonstrated, and there was a marked difference in our campus before that season and then during that season. And then even after, right? Like, it really was this special season of people being encountered, the presence of God being near, people not involved in the prayer movement coming under this spirit of prayer and hunger for God. And so it's just really special. And I know other campuses experienced similar things during that time, but that was kind of some of my experience during that season.
Wow. That's awesome. It's so encouraging just to hear the stories and be reminded, like, hey, what are we praying for? Why are we praying? What are the things that we're hoping to even see during these extended times of praying and fasting? And so it's so cool to hear, again, just testimonies of, like, we as a group of students on our campus, not even necessarily know what all we're doing. We're just like praying, God, would you come? I'm curious actually to hear a little bit more of what you're saying. Our mandate was to pray for revival. Like, what does that mean? Can you explain and unpack that a little bit more? Talk about that.
Yeah. So, as a prayer team, we felt like, one of our main things over, our entire prayer movement since the beginning was really to pray for revival and spiritual awakening at Lee University. Yeah. But in this season, we felt a special emphasis or an extra emphasis where God said, hey, set aside entire nights in your schedule to specifically, without a structure or even like a worship leader or a super clearly designated prayer leader, just to press into this, right? To press into that burden for revival and that burden for souls and that burden for the presence of God on our campus. And so that's kind of what it looked like. It was like an extra emphasis that the Holy Spirit was bringing to that prayer for revival that we never stopped praying, but it was almost as if I'm highlighting this for right now in this season and this in a particular type of way. And we felt as if God responded to our prayers and the prayers of others during that season. But that was our cry, right? It was, God, send revival. It was Psalm 132. I remember praying, Lord, that you would have a resting place on our campus. Like, we won't give sleep to our eyes or slumber to our eyelids till there's a resting place for God at Lee University. That was the heart cry, was that he would draw near. And it was really, the heart of it was hunger for more of him, hunger for his nearness. And I think, as many revivals are characterized, it was really marked by hunger in our hearts and faith.
Yeah, well, that's awesome. I mean, I think that prayer for revival or an outpouring of the Spirit, I think is one that really, unites all of us. We're all constantly praying for that. What other things does the Lord burden your hearts for? As we're praying for the campuses in America right now, I'm sure, we've got prayer leaders from lots of different campuses listening or trying to mobilize their own campuses for prayer. What do we feel like they should be strategically targeting in the place of prayer here in 2022 now?
Yeah, that's a great question. You're asking me, right?
Yeah.
So, I think one thing that we felt like we grew in that season, at least me personally, and I think our entire prayer movement, was really in prophetic intercession and creating some unstructured time to really hear God. Lord, what are you going after? What are you targeting in this season? And so some things that I would say, get alone with God and ask him, hey, or with your prayer core, and really press into God, what are the strongholds that you're wanting to target and remove? The ideologies, these ideas that are exalting themselves above the knowledge of Christ, that are influencing people's minds and hearts and preventing them from coming to Christ. Mm-hmm. So there were a number of those during that season. I think one for us that was huge at Lee that we just knew from years of seeking and asking was the spirit of religion, right? So this form of godliness, but that was denying its power, and this form of religion and Christianity without people really knowing God, right? So that was a huge target during that season, is this spirit of religion, that people will be freed from it. And as we're praying that in that season of fasting, it was as if, there was multiple testimonies of people who said, I grew up in the church, but secretly I've been an atheist in my heart, and I've been encountered by God for the first time, and I know he's real. Yeah. And so that, to me, whenever you hear an individual story, that to me, as we're praying for a corporate stronghold, that to me means that oftentimes is that this corporate stronghold is being broken, at least in a measure. And so you're starting to see individuals get free from this stronghold over their life, and where they can think clearly, see God clearly, see themselves rightly before him, and encounter his presence in a different type of way.
Yeah, that's really good. Let's talk a little bit about that, because I remember as a student prayer leader being really confused on that. I remember leading a number of prayer meetings, and I don't know if you guys ever experienced this, but we'd be doing a prayer meeting, and I always tried to do a lot of unity stuff, and so we'd be praying with people from other groups and stuff like that. And I remember several times there'd be like one person who starts to pray, and I started to like, okay, they're like more preaching than praying.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know if you guys have ever
Yes.
experienced that. You know, like they're like teaching all of their theology, right, through this prayer. And I just had this sneaking suspicion they're not talking to God. They're like talking to me, right? Like, you know, but I remember I'd be in these prayer meetings and it's just like the life just got sucked out of the prayer meeting. And I remember feeling like this happened multiple times. It's just like, why is this happening? What is this thing? And, you know, eventually I felt like, yeah, you know, this is a religious spirit.
Yeah.
That's what this is. Like, this is, you know, it's a religious spirit and it kills like these prayer meetings. It kills stuff that has real life on it.
Mm-hmm.
And the problem is it has such like a cloak of respectability. You know what I mean? That I would get intimidated by it. You know what I mean? Like, you'd be like, oh, sovereign Lord, we know you are holy. So holy, you know, and I'd be like, oh yeah, he is holy, you know, and it's just, I don't know how to describe it, but I remember feeling like I'm intimidated by this thing, you know, and I would let these people dominate prayer meetings or other gatherings, stuff like that. And, you know, eventually as a leader on campus, I started to realize like, I don't like this thing.
Yeah.
Like, I don't want to be doing business with this thing, you know, like, and I just think, you know, a lot of times that can be really confusing for young leaders dealing with that spirit of religiosity because it looks so holy, right? It looks so like religious. And I just want to say, like, you have to fight that thing. Like, you got to fight that thing. Like, and I just want to encourage leaders who are out there, don't respect that spirit, right? We respect our brothers in Christ as people, right? But that spirit that tries to intimidate and like appear really holy, and it's not actually hunger for God, right? It's not actually faith, right? I just want to encourage people, like, that's something, you know, you've got a war against spiritually. And if you're a leader of a prayer meeting, this is something I learned, you know, that was really important. Like, I always want to try and build unity and pray with other believers. But something I realize is I don't want religious people dominating the meetings. Like, that's just, it's not healthy. It's not a powerful or a moving or life-giving prayer meeting. And so I ran into that, you know, at Berkeley of all places. I'm sure in the South, you probably run into that thing all the time, right?
For sure.
Probably run into that thing everywhere.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, and I think for many of the prayer leaders that are listening in, what we're looking to see happen is specifically it's corporate prayer. What you're talking about, unified prayer together. There's power. Like, if you're a Daniel and you're just, I'm the only person praying. There is power in that, but there's also there's something different, something special about the body of Christ coming together to pray, to fast together. But it's a whole nother beast. Trying to lead a corporate prayer meeting all together. You're coming from different denominational backgrounds, different even styles of prayer, and even kind of just speaking to what you experience. Like, we also experienced that as well. We were at the prayer, all these different prayer meetings, and some people will genuinely like, hey, okay, I can tell that's just how you grew up praying. That's the only way you know how to pray. Maybe it's a bit longer of a prayer, it drags on for like a minute, 2 minutes. You're like, okay, you know, short and powerful. But then you can tell when it's like, okay, it's not just like maybe a difference in how we pray. You're actually you're coming with an agenda. I think you can tell when someone's coming with a specific agenda. And as the prayer leader, and as the very clear with, hey, what is the goal of this prayer meeting? Like, for example, when we were having the revival prayer nights at Lee University, it would be 2, maybe 3 hours, but the entire goal of that prayer meeting, like, guys, we are praying for revival. And there might be certain moments where, like, hey, we specifically want to pray for the breaking off of a spirit of religion on Lee University. Maybe we're praying for specific moments, but if there's something like that happens, I remember for us being very clear, and even having to learn from experience, okay, when do we have like all right, they're praying on the mic, they try to completely take it this direction, take it back. Hey guys, just want to remind you, what we're praying for right now is this. Remind them of the topic. Go back, even if you're the one that leads it back again on the correct tangent or the correct topic. It's having to redirect oftentimes in love, but redirect like where the prayer is going for that specific moment of corporate breakthrough. That's the goal of that specific prayer meeting. So yeah, I'm sure we've each had our own experiences with that.
I don't know if you guys ever got rebuked by like leaders, like pastors, you know, like I don't know. I experienced a number of these types of things. Like, just you bringing it up is like, oh my gosh, yeah, we should give some encouragement to young leaders. Cause I don't know about you, like I got rebuked by like, you know, pastors who are like, you know, like God is everywhere. Why do we don't need to pray for some kind of like move of God, right? He's everywhere, you know? And it's just like these subtle discouragements that come from a place of religious authority. You know what I mean? And they're trying to kill like the hunger.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And that was hard for me to discern as a young leader, right?
Yeah.
As a student leader, because a lot of these guys, look, just being real, a lot of churches and fellowships have a strong religious spirit in them. Okay. And that's not me trying to slander them. We've all been in a lot of dead meetings, right? Like when it's dead, that's because there is a strong religious spirit, generally speaking, right? And so I just want to encourage the young, hungry leaders who you want a move of God. Find the other people that are like that, right? Find the people that are hungry for more of God, that want Him, and go with the goers.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Go with the goers. Don't worry too much, about trying to bring in everybody. Although obviously, I think unity is a really important thing, and I'd like to say I think that's another one that as we're praying for our campuses, we should pray for unity in the body of Christ, right? But one of the things that I realized in the course of leading campus prayer is there can be a unity based on compromise, and then there's a unity based on the Spirit, right? And that's not easy to discern, right? But I ran into lots of groups okay, we're not going to do anything if there's a woman leader, right? We're not going to do anything, if these people don't recognize God's sovereignty in a certain way, or we're not going to work together if they don't do it like this. And, you have to compromise so much to get other groups to do stuff with you sometimes, right? And I just want to say, I think there is a good heart in trying to unify, but, just over the course of my, experience as a student leader, I was just I'm just going to go with people that are hungry, right? And I just want to encourage young leaders, go with the goers. And if you have people who are just discouraging all the time, leaders that are discouraging, I'll just say lovingly, brush that off, right? We're going after a move of God, and that is precious and valuable. I think that's really important.
Yeah. I could say one thing on that note. We were really fortunate at Lee, but also really prayerful in asking God for older pastors, leaders, and mentors who would be encouraging of what was going on within our group, but also not controlling. So we were really fortunate. The pastor of the church, his name is Pastor Maloney. He was amazing because he gave us keys to his building, this multi-million-dollar prayer facility. But every time we met with him, he was over and above encouraging, but also, hey, we want partnership and not control.
Yeah,
we believe in you. We believe in this vision, and we believe that God is depositing something specific through these students at Lee University. Obviously, that's a gem.
Yeah. No, that's good.
That's a gem because oftentimes it can be the leader who's encouraging but just wants to take over and control, or the leader that's just super discouraging and you don't really want to roll with them. Yeah. But pray for that person. I remember we went in the history of our prayer movement, we went on fast, extended 40-day seasons of fasting to gain favor with leaders on our campus.
Yeah.
And that's the foundation of how the movement was built and sustained, is that, hey, we were fasting and praying we didn't have anybody to start out with. And we fasted and prayed and asked for those open doors. The second thing, in regards to the religious spirit is, at Lee is a little different. It is, Pentecostal background school. So part of what you would have and how that thing would manifest is that people were overly charismatic in the sense of not even honoring the authority of the leadership structure that was in the prayer meeting, right? So it was just wildness, you know what I mean? I'm going to take the mic, preach a 7-minute sermon, and then give it back to you, do my thing, have my glory in the hot sun, you know? And so what we would try to do in those moments is we had one thing that we did, and I want to give you guys as student prayer leaders permission to do this. We kind of had two different groups that we separated, and we've said this before on this podcast, but we had more of our crowd. So we had a prayer meeting that was targeted more towards our core and our crowd, where we were really discipling the campus to pray. That meeting was more structured, right? That meeting might have 150 students in it that we didn't even know them. They may have never prayed out loud before, but they could engage, right? They could
Mm-hmm.
pray for revival in their specific sphere on the campus.
Yeah.
But part of what we knew we were doing in that meeting was discipling people and teaching them, hey, this is our culture of prayer.
Mhm.
These are our ground rules, right? Like, and we did have those awkward moments where it's like, okay, we're gonna do rapid fire prayer. We're gonna pray a 15-second prayer. Like, we lay the ground rules out, and then the guy grabs the mic and tries to run away from me and start preaching, right? And sometimes, like, I just give you permission, like, run that dude down, you know? Like, I remember several times, like, sometimes I didn't always have the guts, but I remember times where they're in the middle of their thing, and I just grab the mic out of their hand. Because I'm like, this is not God right now, and it's distracting everybody, you know?
100%.
So obviously I encourage the friendly tap on the back, you know? Like, okay, your time's up. But if they're not responding, like, I would physically move the mic. And it's like, that is part of our responsibility as leaders.
Yes.
But in this season I'm talking about with the revival prayer, that wasn't with 120 people, right? That was with our core who were locked in, who were in agreement. We had history together. We went to the same prayer trainings together. We were on the same page. And so there was a very, very deep level of agreement on a theological level, on a biblical level, on a vision level. And we would split up, but that was really a group of about 30, right? And we would do like these 15, 20 person prayer meetings where we just went all out. And it was like, we are in full agreement moving together in this place, and we can go to a depth of prayer. We can do a 3-hour prayer meeting, right?
Yeah.
And so we kind of made that distinction. And then in the larger meetings, we tried to lay out those ground rules, even though, to your point, Dennis, they don't always work.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think we have a responsibility, even as young leaders, to just have the zeal of the Lord and just like not let it go on, you know, and not
Sure.
just to shut it down,
For
you
sure.
know, in love.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And then, yeah.
Yeah. Even some practicals on that. I remember, like, if they're doing rapid fire prayer, like, hey, guys, line up. We're about to do 15-second bursts of prayer for this specific topic. Don't let them hold the mic. You hold the mic for them. And so if like they start to go along, like,
That's it.
all right, next person, like, they can't just keep on going and go. You already have the mic, so you can kind of move that. And so those are some practicals, but they actually are so helpful in like being able to maintain like the unity for the bigger crowds of those prayer meetings, but then also help you keep focus.
For sure.
What's the actual topic that we're all trying
Mhm.
to pray towards, pray to see breakthrough for. Another practical, but as far as those topics in prayer that are, especially for the bigger crowds, like what are those things that's actually really easy for people to connect and engage in prayer on? And one of them is actually lost friends and family members. When you're actually saying, hey guys, right now, get into groups of 3 or 4, we're going to pray for those in your family, those that are here on your campus that you're friends with that don't yet know the Lord. I remember during that season of prayer, we kind of had like a spiritual hit list going on. Now, who are the hardest and darkest on our campus that need the Lord, that we want to actually pray for breakthrough unto their salvation? And actually, David, do you remember that story of the student who got saved while at that party? I don't know if you can share that.
Yeah. We were basically in a prayer meeting one Saturday night, and we felt the Lord probably 2 hours into this prayer meeting. We felt the Lord just fill our hearts with faith to pray for the hardest and darkest students, like on the campus, like those who were least likely to get saved. And we felt like this, yes, subjective, but we felt in our hearts that there was some level of like God had done something in that moment of faith as we were declaring over the campus, hardest and darkest get saved. Well, the next day I speak to one of the chaplains in one of the dorms, and he says, bro, you will never believe what happened last night around 9:00. I get this call from this guy, and he was in this party. He was high on drugs, and he gets hit with the fear of the Lord. And it just happened to be in that exact window that we're praying and declaring this, okay? And this guy runs out of the party. He sobers up, and he calls the resident chaplain and starts confessing all of his sin from the past 7 years. He'd walked away from God 7 years prior. He just starts confessing all of his sin up to that point. And I mean, nobody's giving him a gospel presentation in the middle of this party, right? I mean, he was the furthest guy away, in his own words. And it's just like one moment, because somebody's praying, 10 miles away in a prayer room, God does something in response to those prayers and breaks into his life. And he's forever changed. He became a resident chaplain. He started discipling young men out of addictions. And all this stuff, party lifestyles, and he's still walking with the Lord today from one moment. And so, yeah.
So cool.
That's one of my favorite stories, honestly. Just the power of prayer. Like, you actually don't have to be the one preaching the gospel at that moment, though the Lord obviously uses that.
Sure.
But that when revival comes, that's God's arrival. The Lord ministers in those moments, and he does things that we could never do on our own. And that's the power of prayer and fasting and partnering with what the Lord wants to do. And so I hope these testimonies and these stories have been encouraging to you guys as you've listened today. Actually, I would love to even share some more in a future podcast, specifically on contending prayer, continuing intercession, what that looks like, how to do that on a college campus. And so tune in the future as we continue to do those podcasts. Please comment below as well if you have any specific topics that you guys would like to hear more about. And just as one last call to action, we're in the middle of the Collegiate Jesus Fast right now. There's students all across the United States, even some actually of our friends in Mexico and Canada, all across North America, that are praying right now during these 40 days. It's not too late for you guys to join in. We'll actually include the links in the description for how you guys can engage. Follow us on TikTok. We actually have daily devotionals and prayer times that are happening there. If you check out Prayer Team on TikTok, but we'll put some more just links and helpful resources in the description here. But thank you guys so much for sharing, just being able to talk about today the Collegiate Day of Prayer and Collegiate Jesus Fast. So tune in next time.